At 55 years old, Margaret was struggling to raise her daughter alone. After losing her husband in the war, life had never been kind to her. Her husband had given his life during his service, leaving behind a family barely scraping by on a miner's meager income. Margaret worked long, grueling hours in the mines and spent her nights dreaming of giving her daughter a better life. But fate had other plans. Her daughter, Emily, had fallen in with the wrong crowd, leading her down a dark path. Over time, Emily succumbed to substance addiction, constantly pressuring her mother for money and returning home in fits of anger. Despite her deep concern, Margaret chose kindness over confrontation, always speaking to her daughter in a soft, pleading tone. "Emily, I love you more than anything in this world. All we have left are the memories of your father. Please, listen to me and choose a better path." But Emily's downward spiral only deepened. Her growing anger and defiance began to erode the bond between them. Margaret, though helpless, refused to give up, clinging to the hope that she could still save her daughter. One morning, after a long shift at the mine, Margaret returned home, only to find strangers standing at her door. Confused and anxious, she asked, "There must be some mistake. Why are you here?" The men informed her that they had bought the house, and she no longer had the right to live there. Shocked and distraught, Margaret tearfully responded, "This house, it was my husband's legacy. His memories live within these walls. This has to be a mistake." The heartbreaking truth soon came to light. Emily had used the power of attorney, left by her late father, to secretly sell the house and had left with the money. Margaret found a hastily written note that only deepened her despair. "Mom, I need to live my own life now. I had to sell the house. I hope you can understand." The betrayal left Margaret shattered. Not only had her daughter abandoned her, but she was also forced to part with the home that held her husband's memory. With nowhere to go and no belongings to take, Margaret was forced onto the streets. With only a handful of belongings, Margaret found refuge in the corner of a park. Life had never shown her mercy, but now it was truly unforgiving. Living on the streets, she endured freezing nights, relentless hunger, and the cruel indifference of strangers. One afternoon, while Margaret was begging for food, a group of young people approached her, mocking her relentlessly. One of them jeered, "Hey, old lady, why don't you get a job?" Another burst into laughter as they threw a slice of bread taken from a trash can at her feet. "Here, eat this," they sneered with disdain. Margaret's tears flowed uncontrollably. Her pride and strength had been eroded by a lifetime of hardship. That day, sitting on the cold ground, she whispered to herself, "I no longer belong in this world. Perhaps it's time to let go." At that moment, a black limousine was quietly making its way past the park. Inside, Donald Trump was returning from a business meeting. As he gazed out of the window, his eyes were drawn to a commotion near the park. Spotting a group of people gathered around someone on the ground, he firmly told his driver, "Stop the car." The limousine door opened, and Trump stepped out with purpose. He strode toward the crowd, his presence commanding attention. One by one, the onlookers moved aside, clearing a path for him. At the center of the gathering sat an elderly woman, huddled on the ground. Her clothes were worn and tattered, telling the story of a life full of hardship. She kept her head bowed, her hands trembling, as she wiped away tears. The jeers and mocking laughter of the crowd echoed around her, but she had no strength left to respond. Trump knelt beside her, his voice gentle, yet filled with concern. "Ma'am, what happened here? Why are you sitting on the ground like this?" Margaret slowly raised her head, her weary eyes meeting Trump's. For a moment, she froze in shock, realizing who was speaking to her. Tears streamed down her face as she began to speak in a trembling voice. "Mr. President, I gave everything to this country. My husband, he was a hero. He died serving in Vietnam. I was left behind with only his memories and our little girl. But everything fell apart." Trump gently placed his hand on hers, urging her to continue. "Please, go on. I want to hear your story. Tell me what happened," he said softly. Margaret took a deep, shaky breath, trying to hold back her sobs. "After my husband died, life was never the same. I did everything I could to make ends meet. I started working in the mines. Dangerous, grueling work, but I had no choice. I wanted to give my daughter a good life. I wanted to protect her, to give her opportunities. But no matter how hard I tried, things just got worse. Her voice cracked as she continued. My daughter Emily, she fell in with the wrong crowd. Her friends led her astray, and soon she became addicted. I tried everything, Mr. President. I begged her, pleaded with her to turn her life around, but she only grew angrier, more distant. She demanded money, and when I didn't have it to give, she resented me for it. Margaret paused, her hands trembling as she wiped away her tears. One day, she did something I never imagined she could. She used the power of attorney left by her father to sell our home. She didn't tell me. I came back from work to find strangers at my door, telling me it was no longer my house. She left me a note and left. She abandoned me. Trump's expression hardened with empathy as Margaret's voice broke. That house wasn't just a building. It was my sanctuary. It held all of my husband's letters, our memories, and the life we built together. When I lost that house, I felt like I lost my husband all over again. Since then, I've been living on the streets. Trump leaned in closer, his voice steady. And how did you end up here today? Margaret let out a deep sigh, her voice filled with despair. I've been surviving day by day, begging for food, trying to endure the cold, the hunger, the sickness. But people, they're cruel. They don't see me as a person anymore. Today, when those kids mocked me, when they threw bread at me like I was an animal, I realized I couldn't take it anymore. I was ready to give up. I thought, maybe it's time for me to leave this world. Trump's face softened, and he nodded, taking her hand in his. Margaret, what you've endured is beyond imaginable. But please, know this. People like you and your husband, who have given everything for this country, deserve so much more. Your husband was a hero, and so are you, in your own way. I promise you, you're not alone anymore. Tonight, you'll stay as my guest. Tomorrow, we'll figure this out. I'll make sure you have a roof over your head and a chance to rebuild your life. For the first time in years, Margaret felt a glimmer of hope. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Thank you, Mr. President. I don't know how to thank you. I've never had anyone care like this before." Trump stood, his resolve unwavering. Turning to his advisors, he gave a clear, firm command. Find Margaret a home. Organize everything she needs. A new life, medical care, and safety. I want this done immediately. Margaret looked up at Trump, her voice trembling with gratitude. You don't know what this means to me. After everything, you've given me hope again. Trump smiled gently. Margaret, this country owes you and your family. It's time we start repaying that debt. That day marked the beginning of a new chapter for Margaret. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, valued, and hopeful. It was the day she realized that even in the darkest times, kindness and humanity could make all the difference. Trump took Margaret to his home, offering her a warm meal, a clean bed, and a sense of peace. The next day, he contacted several charities and arranged for Margaret to have a new home and proper care. For the first time in years, Margaret slept safely under a roof, free from worry. Not long after, Emily realized the gravity of her mistakes. She visited her mother, tears streaming down her face, and apologized. "Mom, I made a terrible mistake. I'll never forgive myself for hurting you," she said. Margaret embraced her daughter, forgiving her with all her heart. Trump brought Margaret and Emily together and said, "We all need a second chance. What matters is how we choose to use it." As Margaret stepped into her new life, she realized that despite her painful past, there was still hope for a brighter future. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you help us bring more inspiring stories to light and spread hope to those who need it most. Together we can make a difference.